means it's B Cube Sunday morning. Now, for those of you who are waiting in abject disappointment for Tom Whitmore was a kind and gentle soul. He gave up his second week because Tom always does the second week of the month, and Jim and David always do the last Sunday. But Tom gave up his second Sunday so that we could tell you about a brand new project we have. By the way, good morning there, Mr. Lucas. I'm glad you read the Bible. That's another story. But anyhow, we here at B Cubed, we got our start when we really were annoyed about them electing President Trump. And so after getting over the sickness of watching his inauguration and the huge crowds, Irene Radford and I decided that we were going to put out an anthology called Alternative Truths. It took us 100 days, and boy, did we have fun doing it. And
I only tried to strangle you 3 times.
Fortunately, the phone lines are long.
Phyllis wants you to define fun.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what we've done here is I have got an equal opinion about how the Supreme Court of the United States has failed America here by letting themselves be turned into a bunch of political hacks that will commit perjury in order to gain the power to do what they want to do all along. And that is cram their freaking religion down our throats without even so much as a good morning kiss. I'm just not thrilled with them right now. But anybody reading our new project is going to be well aware of that. So we're putting this new project together. The title is a post-Roe alternatives, but it's really about how the Supreme Court has failed us and what the consequences of this are. Because anybody who thinks the only rights women have had recognized are abortion, do not fail to remember that in 1972, you couldn't get a library card, you couldn't buy a car, you couldn't buy a house, you couldn't open a bank account in many places without your husband's signature. Okay? This is that world that they want to take us back to. They want to take us back to the Leave It to Beaver with Mrs. Beaver shackled to the kitchen and with a swelly belly. It's the world they want. So, we've done something good. We've assembled 10 editors, most of whom we've had fun with here at B Cubed. Worked hard. And said each editor gets to pick a couple of stories, and then they're going to take and push those stories to polished best. And then Phil is going to assemble them, and we're going to put out an anthology a week before the election so that we can have it in the hands of everybody that'll buy it and say, no, we want our rights back. We want the rights for our wives and daughters and mothers and sisters back. And these are also the rights for Tom, because pretty soon he's going to be so old, he's going to need somebody to drive for him. And if you can't get a license as a woman anymore, he might be SOL. So, who do we have here this morning? We have Irene Radford, author of 312 books.
49. I'm just winding up number 49.
Yeah, you're no Jane Yolen.
Yeah.
She's hit 400 and something. I just had to do her bio. It's like, my God. Okay, we have Ellie Barnes of Nova Scotia. She claims no claim to fame. But the mere fact that as a woman, she's willing to stand up and say, nah, I don't think that'd be prudent over what's going on in the country today. Welcome, Ellie.
It's good to be here.
And then, of course, Tom Easton, author of Destinies, 37 and a half years as a book reviewer for, what was that?
I spent 30 years with Analog, and I quit when the numbers were nice and neatly round. 300 columns, 30 years. So I've been free of that for a while.
That works. Yes, we have 10 editors, Andrew.
It's up to 12, isn't it?
Did I misspell SCOTUS? No, I did not.
No, that's Barbara.
Rowe? Hey, good morning, Barbara. Barbara's one of those folks who's come to us via Jim and David, but she came for Jim, but she stayed for Bob. So, what insanity have made you people sign up for this?
Mostly because I've been co-editor with you on all of your major projects, including the first 3. And I couldn't pass up the opportunity. I'm not a very political person. I do not watch the news. So most of what I know about what's going on is filtered through Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he convinced me that this is a project that really needed to be done. And so I'm stepping out of my safe little corner and going to do it and may kick myself. So, Ellie, why are you here?
I am here because the age of a woman who was born with the right to open her own bank account is 48. That's roughly 10 years younger than me.
Yeah.
My daughter was born with that right. And SCOTUS just laid the groundwork to take that away from her. And I'll be damned before I go down without a fight.
Yeah. And Tom, what about you?
Well, post-Roe alternatives. Bob is saying that he wants to talk a lot about all of the other things that this is going to cost us. But I started thinking right away about after we take away Roe, how are we going to handle things? And I thought to myself that it amounts to drafting women to have babies. So what would draft dodgers look like? Those of you who have access to the submissions can see what I came up with. And it's intended to be somewhat silly, but at the same time with a point to it. As Bob says, you want to hear an awful lot in this book from women, but some of us old farts, Bob, for instance, have things to say as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will remind people, and it's a terrible thing to do because the social media is filled with angry women, and a lot of times it's the old white guys that get it. But it was 9 old guys that voted to recognize the rights to choice. And there were 3 women on the court that voted to take it away. We've just got to look past sex and look for allies on this because we're all in this together.
Yeah.
That we are.
Yeah.
I know that part of, a lot of this is you want to hear women's voices. From my perspective, we also need men's voices, men that are, to stand up and say, this is not right. These are our wives, these are our daughters, these are our sisters, these are our mothers, our aunts, these are our neighbors.
And
these are people.
And it's going to be us because Thomas has already said he wants to take on contraception.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mhm.
guess what?
But he does not want to take on Loving versus Virginia.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I'll bet his wife does. Um, the oh, you want to? No, he would
Yeah.
have us go back to the days of Plessy versus Ferguson. He it was Mark Meadows who actually brought up going after board versus the Board of Education. I mean, Brown versus the Board of Education. Sorry.
You're not thinking far enough back. Women gained the right to own property in 1848, I think. They want to go back before that.
Yeah. It's an
Women-
attempt to legislate morality, but who defines morality? And it just doesn't work. Time and time again, you get cult followers who may adhere to the prophet's version of morality, but the rest of the world looks on with horror. But it's not. It's about control. Men trying to prove their masculinity by controlling a woman. And if you look back at the Salem witch trials and the rest of the witch trials throughout Europe during that century, the definition of a witch basically comes down to a woman who lives outside the control of a man. They're
Well,
widows. They're widows. They're spinsters. They've been orphaned without a dowry. They live on the fringe of the village, and they're very often knowledgeable about herbs and natural medicine. And they cater to women. There
well,
are
speaking up has always been problematical. The curse
Mhm.
word applied to women forever has been uppity.
Mhm.
Sassy.
Well,
Sassy and uppity.
if you're going to steal
Speaking
rights
of
from women,
witches, Phyllis,
Yeah.
steal them
um,
from the uppity ones.
Mhm.
the current candidate for the Secretary of State in Michigan is peddling a narrative that women who get abortions are practicing child sacrifice, and they are sacrificing their unborn babies to themselves because they believe they are God. And on the heels of that narrative,
Mhm.
she is also peddling the idea that women who want abortions want them because they consented to sex with the wrong person. And I was there when I saw that. I was thought to myself. I thought, how do you get there?
Mhm. Yeah. Women
And
do
it's
take
like
that
laying the
position.
groundwork for that. You know, you have a woman who wants an abortion. Obviously, she's possessed by a demon, so you incarcerate her until she has the baby, and then you execute her or you exorcise her.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's the situation where the men have the right to choose their sexual partners at random. Women
Mhm.
do not. And women who do, therefore, are outside society,
Outside the norm. The
outside the
norm, as you know.
which puts them in the classification of the ancient classification of a witch.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of the propaganda against witches really stems from their knowledge of herbal medicine and their willingness to treat women.
Well, but can I?
And there are herbs that will regulate your bodily cycles, but they're also abortives.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how they regulate
There's
your cycles. But it's also, basic first aid, lotions and potions against rashes,
tinctures.
and all kinds of small ailments. And there was a time in the 19th century when midwives actually had a higher rate of women and babies surviving childbirth simply because they washed their hands.
Semmelweis.
Yeah, purpurea.
It was
Purpurea was huge in killing mothers.
right, and up until basically the 1950s, childbirth was a 50-50 chance of a death sentence.
In some instances, it still is. I mean, there's,
Let's leave Mississippi alone now.
America is last in the race to take, for prenatal care, for postnatal care, for maternal leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, among the industrialized nations, that is the fact. So let's talk about this book a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, because it is true. There have always, America has had no shortage of persecuting women.
Mm-hmm.
And it has had no shortage of trying to, of a failure to recognize the inherent human rights of all of us. But what other consequences are going to come out of this? I mean, I fully expect to see that gay marriage equality will be the next major target, because we've already got the prayer in schools and the abortion rights.
Mm-hmm.
So if you target gay marriage, then my concern with the LGBTQIA community is trans men in what I've been recently calling the rift, because it's like there's this rift in the middle of the country between states that are doing what, are protecting women's rights, or at least have some measures of protection for women's rights, and states that enacted trigger laws.
Yeah.
And my concern for the alphabet mafia is trans men, because if they're denied their medications, now all of a sudden their body dysmorphia is back. So you have this, but you take away those medications, and those states turn those men into brood mares.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can, if they consider, if you have the moral police out there, and you've got a woman who is dressing as a man, who is acting like a man, who is trying to be a man, just like they did back in the, I mean, how my grandmother didn't wear a pantsuit until 25 years after my grandfather was in the grave.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the 70s. I mean, my grandfather died in 1952.
Yeah.
Way before I was born, and she didn't put on a pantsuit till 1975.
Right. I grew up on the East Coast in the 50s and 60s. And I was not, the dress code in schools, banning girls from wearing slacks, trousers, whatever, did not happen until the year after I graduated.
Yeah, I can remember being from age 5 to I think age 9.
Mm-hmm.
We were not allowed. Girls were not allowed to wear pants to school. We had to wear dresses. Didn't have to be a uniform because it was a public school, but we had to wear dresses.
Right. Right.
We didn't have co-ed PE until I was in high school.
Yeah.
Well, those
and so it's like there's all of these layers to women's rights,
Mm-hmm.
to
and it's
a woman's right, and how she chooses to express herself,
actually,
and how people in general, not just women, but how people choose to express themselves.
Yeah. And it comes down.
Go ahead, Phil.
It comes down to a woman's right to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, no, I don't want to wear skirts. I want to wear pants. I want to wear jeans.
I don't want to have sex
Well, let's
I don't want to do this, but it's like, no, I don't want to be a housewife. I want to be an engineer. No, I don't feel as though I'm a woman. I feel as though I'm non-binary, or I feel as though I'm this, or I feel as though I'm that. And it's
yeah, and so
it's
that's
the ability to express yourself in your own,
Mm-hmm.
to
Well, the idea
what's
that
the
women
word?
need
What's the word?
help
Mm-hmm.
probably
It's
getting
the
very quick
ability.
to where
I'm sorry.
there's no such thing anymore as marital rape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Due to SCOTUS?
So Bob's been trying to say something for a couple minutes.
Sorry,
Oh,
Bob.
okay. I'm sorry. No, I'm trying to. I mean, I can. I'm not denying the outrage or the moments of all of this.
Mhm.
But Tom, you're wrong on that. Marital rape is still on the books as against the law.
Mhm.
It is now. It took a long time to get there.
Yeah, that was in the 80s, if
Yep.
I remember
The
correctly.
1980s, yes.
We're getting to the point where that's going to come off the books.
Yeah,
Well,
that's another thing.
what are some other things that we can expect as a consequence of having a bunch of right-wing Catholic nut jobs? And I will not apologize because 7 of 9 on the Supreme Court are Catholic.
You
Uh,
are considerably
I
kinder
expect-
than I would be.
I expect this out of the Baptists. I thought the Catholics had better taste than this.
Yeah.
But what else can we expect?
Just as a side comment, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Maisha Merlin was still a live publisher, they published a couple books by a young man. One was the Witch, the Virtual Corpse, and the Gumshoe Gorilla. But in his world, scientists had identified the gay gene. And the Baptists, the only thing they hated worse than abortion was gays. So in Baptist territory, there was an increase in abortion and an elimination of babies that would become gay. And so the only people who did it worse than them were the Catholics, who hate abortion more than they hate gays. And so all of the nomenclature, the symbolism surrounding gays had Catholic overtones, because they were the only ones not having abortions when the gay gene was identified.
Well, I don't think abortions are very much of an issue in the gay community.
Yeah, no. But
Or
you know,
gays.
in
But they have
families,
feelings about it, I'm sure.
you know, but the families, normal, everyday married couples, they go in for their ultrasounds and amniocentesis, a DNA blood test, et cetera, et cetera. They discover the gay gene, that pregnancy is ended.
Ah, interesting.
Except in the Catholic communities. And so the gays that are born adopt, the crucifix entwined with roses and other symbolisms from the Catholic Church, which I thought was a really interesting premise.
That is an interesting premise. Another premise I'd like to explore is if this flies, if this stays, what are the other ramifications, the other consequences, the next step down this slippery slope that they put us on when they've reintroduced religion and back into our government?
Well, having been raised in a Catholic church, one of the next steps would be to disallow girls to serve at the altar. That didn't start until the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, where they were allowing girls to be altar boys, to serve at the altar. They would probably start disallowing women to be Eucharistic ministers. That started in also the late 70s, early 80s to help with the shortage in the priesthood. So the Eucharistic ministers would help administer communion. They would go out into the community to those parishioners who were not able to make it to church, and they would bring the missal. They would do a shortened version of the mass and bring communion wafers and wine.
Right.
So that would be a repercussion of that. So it would take women out of that ability to participate in the sacred rituals of the Catholic Church.
Right. And the Episcopal Church. I was a lay minister for an Episcopal congregation about that period, late 80s, early 90s.
Right.
And it was a way of expressing my faith very deeply and emotionally, as well as serving the community. And but I can remember as a teenager in the Lutheran church why can't I light the candles and assist at the Eucharist? This is because you're a girl.
Can I make a point on this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the church. That's the individual. That's the community. And the Supreme Court had nothing to do with letting girls be altar boys.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're called acolytes.
Yeah, now they're called acolytes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was told that men serve at the altar, women clean up after them. That's what I was told as a teenager, which kind of defines the rest of life too, that men do the dirty work and women clean up after them. But that's not recognized as a valuable service.
To answer Bob's question, though, I would imagine that maybe what might come down from the papacy would be that couples would no longer be allowed to write their own vows when they got married, and that the word obey would be back in, would be required.
Yeah, I'm still kind of in the position of separating. I mean, for now, I have a vague separation of church and state mental set. So I'm kind of interested in what the consequences of the Roe v. Wade decision, some of the basis on it, are for the other rights that we as a society take for granted. Tom.
There's one thing that isn't getting discussed very much. We've heard that this decision is going to hit hardest the poor and people of color. When this runs into those people who worry about replacement theory, we're going to have some fights, big fights. After all, they think that if we let the people of color breed, all the whites will be replaced, right? Now they're enforcing that breeding.
Okay.
Where does that one go?
Bob, I got to bounce. I got to go to work.
Okay, well, you go to work, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
It was nice. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being given the opportunity to weigh in on this. I hope I have more opportunities later.
Well, you'll be one of our editors, so you'll have a chance for a couple of stories on there.
Okay. All right. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
All right.
Somebody's telling me they have my high school, 6869, began an open revolt against the dress code. Yes, that is something that I can appreciate. Very short story here. I just got my first citation for protesting about 2 weeks ago. Did it down in Texas. I was across the street from a church. It's across the street from the church my parents got married in so many years ago, and across the street from the church where I saw my first civil rights action. I have 8 sisters. 8 sisters led by my mother, who took up their cause said, no, we will not be banned from wearing pants to church. And so they took it on and they won.
Mm-hmm.
And while, so, I mean, I appreciated that. And that was one of the reasons why I took one of those same sisters with me and her son across the street to do the protesting. And it was it was rather rewarding. Um, so I believe that as a consequence of all of this, there are going to be massive protests. But I'm just scared to death to see they're already taking out the First Amendment wherever they can on both what is free speech and what they can do to restrict any speech they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you go down and I was down at Stephenville working on a project, and they very explained to me that, well, there could be no protests in front of the library for banning books because protests are banned anywhere outside of a very narrow strip of land outside the student center. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we are.
Yeah. If you take the restriction of rights, you're going to. I think we're going to start seeing libraries closed because we don't want to taint the minds of our impressionable young people with the truth.
Well, look at the books that are on the banned list to be removed.
Mm-hmm.
If it has LGBTQ in the subject matter, it's on the list.
Right. Now, I remember that from, it would have been the mid to late 90s. There was a bill in front of the Oregon Senate and Representatives to ban LGBT literature. And Powell's Books in downtown Portland had little signs, and every book that even mentioned a gay character, they put a little sign on it. If this bill passes, this book will be banned. And it's about half of the fiction section, as well as yeah.
I kind of like to have one of my books banned. It would up the sales no end.
Right. My third Merlin book, Guardian of the Vision, I made the big mistake of stating several times in the text that no matter what name you give to God, she is listening. And there was a fundamentalist church that informed me they had banned the book and would be burning it. Well, they had to go out and buy over 100 copies of the hardcover in order to burn them.
Reminds me when somebody, remember, Phil, when we were at MissCon and somebody stole 6 copies of Alternative Theology.
I wasn't there, but I heard about it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Somebody stole 6 copies of Alternative Theologies because they were offended by the subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
It hit the bestseller list when the people in the world found out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or it hit it again.
Yeah.
So we're going to have, I think, an unholy confluence of hate happen as a consequence of Roe v. Wade. We've got the white supremacists who just hate the idea of, I don't see a lot of women marching around with tiki torches.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're there. And the anti-abortion and the my church is the church movement. Mm-hmm. I think that confluence of those 3 are going to threaten the fabric of this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait until a Satanist teacher tries to pray in school.
Well, we've had that down at Fort Hood, Texas, where the Supreme Court, I think it made it to the Supreme Court, ruled that Fort Hood, Texas had to accommodate the Satanists who wanted to hold their rituals on the grounds of the base because they let Christians. You see, that's religious equality, and I've not been a fan of any of them using my public lands for their worship. But if you're going to do it equally. I think that we've set the stage now for the unequal, where they will not let a Muslim coach throw his prayer rug down on the 50-yard line.
Mm-hmm.
They will not. I don't know enough about all the religions of the world to say how they would exactly celebrate us having, a bunch of young men with testosterone beat the crap out of each other on a football field. But it's going to be ugly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a note here that says white supremacist women are in the background. Back down in Texas, I had to carry my signs to a hotel lobby.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's anybody who thinks it's all the men are the problem on this Roe v. Wade, has not met the church ladies. Oh my God, the church ladies. They are the leaders and the pushers and the phone banks. I was in my mother's house when Roe v. Wade got overturned, and it was the phone bank that they used to organize themselves that resulted in how she found out about it.
Mm-hmm.
They literally, the phone bank was spreading the word to say their prayers had been answered.
Yeah. There was an incident at an Oricon. Now, the science fiction fantasy community in their conventions is notably as liberal and as inclusive as you can imagine. And Reverend Lionel Fanthorpe used to come from Wales every year. And he would conduct an Anglican Episcopalian church service every Sunday morning of the conventions. I, at that time, was a lay minister for our local Episcopal church. And one woman very volubly denounced my presence in that church service and walked out.
Were you wearing your bathrobe?
No. No.
That is
For those of you wondering about my purple fuzzy, I normally don't get dressed until I finished my morning's work, because if I'm dressed, it's too easy to leave. And I do that enough. I have deadlines. So anyway, but to have, I was embarrassed, humiliated, and thankfully, Reverend Fanthorpe, being the wonderful person he is, said, no, this is the way the church is organized. There's no problem with women behind the altar anymore. And
I mentioned my mother.
Yeah.
When I asked her bluntly in 2016 why she was voting for Trump,
mm-hmm.
she explained to me that she just didn't think a woman could do that kind of a job. And all I could think of is, you are the woman who led the revolt at church. You are the woman who gets up 6 days a week and goes out and works alongside your husband in the field or in the cedar breaks, and then comes home and cooks dinner for all of your children. Mm-hmm. You are the woman who, when the engine on your car broke up, you and your mother rebuilt the engine. What part of that woman doesn't have the wherewithal to step out and lead and take action? Mm-hmm. I don't know, and I was just shocked when she said that, because whoever made her believe that, despite everything she did,
drank the Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
Say that again, Tom?
Drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, she drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah. I mean, the accomplishments of women in history are sufficient that anybody who thinks that they're incapable of this hasn't read a lot of history.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
Yeah. Okay. There's an old saying when I was still working in an office and not for myself, that if you want something done and you want it done right the first time, ask a busy woman.
Or
Because, yeah,
I
because
heard that same thing, only I've heard it ask a busy person.
yeah. Well, back in the 80s when I was still working for somebody else, the saying was to ask a busy woman because she's organized and she's efficient and she knows how to do everything. Or if she doesn't know how to do it, she knows how to delegate it.
I'll agree with you that, because the busy people are the people who do know how to get stuff done, because if they don't, they won't get anything done, and then they won't get the good jobs. So women I know women right now today are paid less. Do you see, I'm be interested in seeing a story in this book that said that this current Supreme Court becomes the impetus that gets the Equal Rights Amendment passed.
We have too many states that think the Supreme Court is doing precisely the right thing.
Say that again, Tom?
Too many states think the Supreme Court is doing exactly the right thing.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Some of them.
I said too many.
Too many.
But the people,
one state thinking that is too many. But I will agree with you.
That would seriously interfere with passing ERA.
Yeah. So, but somebody earlier mentioned racism on the increase, and restrictive laws. Brenda Clough, who's a frequent contributor on these Sunday mornings, is Chinese, ethnically Chinese. She was born in the United States. Her parents were born in the United States, but her grandparents emigrated from China. And her blood is 100% Chinese, even though she's a U.S. citizen. And her father worked for the United States Diplomatic Corps because he spoke Asian languages. And when she and her husband got married, which would have been in the early 70s, early to mid 70s, I think, there were only 13 states where they could be married because it was an interracial marriage.
Loving again.
Yeah. And so they've been married 40 years, have two of the most beautiful children and two grandchildren. And there's states that if they travel together, they can't book a hotel room together. So there's, it's not just black versus white. It's white versus everything.
I think that I'm going to correct you on that, Phil.
Yeah.
I think it's power versus powerless. And the powerful will marshal those poor white folks to carry their banners, just like they did in the Slavers' Rebellion of 1861. They convinced all these poor white farmers that somehow, if they didn't, there were flyers going out talking about that their daughters would be turned over to the slaves if they didn't rise up and join and separate themselves from this union. The powerful are very good at manipulating the poor to join them in on them to fight against the other poor.
Yeah.
It's like when Montezuma marched on Mexico City. he didn't walk in there with just 100 men on horseback. He had 20,000 allies behind him that were part of the people he was trying to dominate.
Yeah.
You don't mean Montezuma. You
Did I
mean
say
Cortez.
Who?
Montezuma was the Aztec chieftain.
Yeah.
You mean
I
the
mean, not
Spanish?
Montezuma, Cortez.
You mean the Spanish one, right?
Yeah,
Cortez.
I think it was Cortez.
Yeah.
We have somebody down here who was asking about the implications of the rulings in states. Life begins at fertilization and personhood. And that is one that upsets me because 50 to 80% of all conceptions miscarry before anybody even knows they're pregnant.
Right.
And if you're going to say that somebody who has a miscarriage is committing murder, every sexually active woman not on birth control is a murderess. And this is not going to go over well when you try to tell these white supremacist legislators that that's true of their mothers and wives.
Yeah. They come back to the argument that she must have done something dangerous to the fetus or the embryo or whatever. There's a whole lot of misinformation out there about ectopic pregnancies and how dangerous they are to the mother.
Yep.
And they are not viable pregnancies. Very often they the embryo has begun to dissolve because it can't get into the womb to implant itself and get nutrients.
I like to see a lot of these legislators charged with practicing medicine without a license.
Yeah. They really should. Yeah, they really should at this point. And let's face it, women have always had abortions for one reason or another, not just immorality of sleeping around too much. That will continue up until SCOTUS went berserk. Women had safer options. They had a good chance of surviving the procedure. But this is taking away that margin of health and safety.
Okay, so we're writing a book about this.
Yeah.
And if you're out there and you're a writer, these have been some notions, but I got 10 editors who have been tasked that they get to select 2 of the stories being submitted, and they will guide it to fruition, and we will Phil will then be assembling it. And maybe if we get enough really great stories, we'll get 3. So if you're a writer and you're out there and you say, what can I do about this? How can I stand up? How can I do my part? Well, I've already got 2 blue senators in my state. Now, my congressman is basically a fascist who is scrambling for his political life against other fascists because we are a top 2 primary state. So we indelibly and never inexorably are going to be voting, having 2 people on the ballot that one of them is a really bad fascist and the other one is fascist light.
Still a fascist.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah.
Do you remember the movie Brewster's Millions? And he spends a fortune on a campaign of elect none of the above. He wants everybody in their vote to write in none of the above.
Yeah, that don't work. That is something that the far right wing has always thought was a good idea. But yeah.
But the clever politician rushes to court and changes his or her name to none of the above.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Um,
There's way, but it was just the concept that American voters were sick and tired of being manipulated by politicians who could only see their own sense of power.
and that's it. That's where this all comes back to. Power to the church,
Mhm.
okay? And that's what it's about. And power to the politicians who depend on these poor, uneducated
Mhm.
people who will vote for them because they trip some mental trigger about prayer in schools. Why can't Johnny pray in school?
Mhm.
Well, let
And
me
they
see.
want to fill the public schools if they possibly can to keep more people stupid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and right now the public school is a money pot. And
Mhm.
every private school out there that wants to teach somebody about how to be a good Baptist or a good evangelical sees that as a money pot that they want to get their fingers into.
Mhm.
Uh,
What did Puppy do this time?
I'm going to go look.
Okay. So yeah, and one of the things that I think we will see is women being pulled out of school at age 16 because you don't need an education to take care of a husband and children. And then it'll be lowered to 14, to 12. There's currently cases going on in Oregon with the Russian immigrant families who are called old believers, and they do not allow their daughters to attend school beyond 8th grade. And every 5 years or so, one of those daughters will divorce her parents for the right to go to school.
It is
I
crazy.
think that's one of the next steps, is that women are going to be denied education.
I believe that it won't be considered a right. It'll be
Yeah.
considered a privilege. And that's how the right wing gets at it. I mean, you have a right to walk an AR-15 into your school, and you're not a criminal until you shoot your first child.
Hmm.
You know, but God, and you got a right to carry a Bible in there.
Hmm.
But God forbid you should have a book in the library that talks about Heather and her two mothers.
Yeah.
Uh,
Laura Mendez just made a comment. We are headed into Taliban territory. But if you mention that to a lot of these fundamentalists, you are, I mean, that is the worst thing you could say. They are so anti-Muslim that the idea they are following Muslim traditions in suppressing women, they will not admit it. But we're different. We're doing it differently.
we're doing it for our purposes.
Right.
Hey, I don't think religion belongs in our schools. I don't think Muslim religions belong in our school. I don't think Buddhism belongs in our schools. I don't I don't think Catholicism,
Mhm.
Christianity, any of them, they don't belong in the school.
But the kids should be taught about them all.
Well, they should be
Yeah.
taught in an awareness manner. I mean, try teaching the history of 17th century England without talking about religion.
Yeah.
You
Well,
can't.
I've thought for many years that it would be great fun to teach a course in creationism. There are about 40 of them that I could
Mhm.
find without a problem.
Yeah,
Mhm.
here's your creation myth where a basket is dumped in the earth with all of the
Right.
animals in it. Here's the one where a white guy goes on a 6-day work binge.
Yeah.
A white man. No, there's actually technically, I guess it'd be an old Jewish man.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Separation of church and state is a very modern concept. Um, it just doesn't exist in history.
Yes, it does.
Where?
Uh, Genghis Khan
Okay.
was a firm believer in separation of church and state. Uh, he actually sent Catholic priests as emissaries to King Edward. It was a Chinese priest gave King Edward mass, but it was that he tolerated all of the different religions. He just did not promote one over the other. There's a big difference between tolerating religion and promoting religion. Like I said,
but anyway, it's a very modern concept, and legally in England, the Queen is still head of the church. The English Anglican Church is still the state recognized church.
Yeah, and that's exactly why our founding fathers said Congress should make no laws concerning the establishment of a religion or the banning.
When I was researching one of my Merlin's Descendants books, probably the 5th one, Guardian of the Freedom, there was, one of the things I stumbled across was a website that said, quite frankly, the founding fathers were not religious. They were deists. They didn't belong to any one Christian religion. They just believed in a God. And therefore, we as Christians do not need to follow the Constitution of the United States. Okay. I closed that website out and never returned to it because it was something I could not support. Doesn't matter what church they went to.
Yeah, I'm just a firm believer that it is if you actually set any of these people down and had a button that an impartial panel could push every time they started spouting lies or bullshit, that it would basically, you would have an unlimited time to educate them because every response they have is generally lies or bullshit.
Well, what do you want to do with the button? Blow them up or just electrocute them?
Well, I like the idea of, remember when Trump tried to, could you imagine if he had actually had a button to mute him whenever he started telling lies, and Hillary had had a button to mute him when she started telling lies? Hillary would have got 8 words to 1 in on that debate. Hillary told us so. And now look where we are today. And there's 2 people I blame more for this than anybody else: Mitch McConnell and Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich destroyed the faith of the American people in government by holding hearings on whether or not the president got a blowjob.
Yeah.
He's probably one of half a dozen presidents who didn't have somebody giving him a blowjob outside of his wife during his time in office.
You can look back all the way to McCarthy, too.
Yeah,
McCarthy?
I grew up in the McCarthy era. It was a scary time.
Yep.
And I can remember, to my parents, calling someone a communist was a huge insult.
Well,
we're getting...
It was equivalent to calling somebody crazy, which was also a huge...
Yeah, does anybody here think...
Getting very close to going back to those days of witch hunts.
Does anybody think Russia or China are communist countries? No, they're not. Russia is far closer to fascism than communism, and China is an interesting combination of just you throw a little bit of oligarchy in there, and it gets going. Now, Lily, is that
Liam Westcott?
Yeah, he's brought up the fairy tale thing a couple of times. But yeah, I mean, the only difference between a fairy tale about witches and goblins and the fairy tales about creation and um, heaven and hell is the who's telling the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can remember really right up through high school in any kind of novel, fiction, fairy tale, whatever you want to call it. If you labeled someone a witch or warlock, that's an automatic word for villain.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
they are. But guys, we've used up our time,
Yeah,
and
we could go on forever.
oh, we could go on whining. But what we're going to go on with, is we're going to go on with putting out a book that tells thoughtful stories.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back and read Alternative Truths, every story was not a bash Trump. If you go
Mm-hmm.
back to alternative theologies, every story wasn't bash religion. These are stories that say, let's make you think about what went on and what are the consequences. Let's make you think about what is a religion's place. And like this, we all know the SCOTUS failed us. We all know that they did what they did because they're dominated by political hacks. But we're going to do more in this book than just mock them. We're going to make you think about what could be one way or another, and how we're going to make it better, and how we're going to turn around and make, because this has got to be turned around. Okay, this court, if they keep going the way they are going, I mean, I'm already disappointed that my granddaughter has less rights than her mother, and her mother had less rights than her mother. I mean, what is the logical outcome of this? Is not a pretty picture.
Yeah, I'd like to hold up as an example when we did alternative theologies. We were expecting a lot of snarky humor against the hypocrisy of organized religion. What we got was a very thoughtful collection of stories about why we believe, not what we believe, but why we believe, and the power of prayer. And it's my favorite of all the anthologies I've done because of that. And I'm really hoping this post-Roe anthology does the same kind of turnaround.
It does. Now, we're going to have a few places where we're going to make fun of the dumbasses that brought us this.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be. But we're going to have the people that says, why is it important that we have these freedoms? Because I think that's one of the questions, that why is it important that society be one way rather than another?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it important that my daughter have the right to choose? Why is it important?
Doesn't, it sucks.
Huh?
When she doesn't, it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's part of the thing. Why is it important that we have a better society? And you know, I know I could go on forever, but just as a reminder, next week we're going to be having a discussion with different people that have some of the same interesting things. We're going to be talking with women who lived through those eras before their rights were recognized, and what were not just the big indignities, but the little indignities that women had to live through in as recently as the 70s and the 80s, because there are people who would have you believe that we have put all of the darkness so far in the history that you need a book to dig it up. And I'm telling you, you can walk out and talk to your great Aunt Susan. You can talk to your mother. You can talk to your grandmother, and they can tell you what the indignities were that we suffered under the pre-privacy world. That
Any woman will tell you there are still indignities. Nowadays, the popular word is microaggressions, but they're certainly still there.
they are still there, but at least in the microaggressions, I've noticed that it's a rather equal opportunity for that these days. But yes, there are still indignities that women have to endure every day. There's indignities that the poor have to endure every day. There's indignities that the minorities have to endure every day that you won't find anywhere on somebody making $300,000 a year or more, uh, for the most part. But
We're out of time.
we're out of time. That's what we're going to talk about next week. And guys, this is big, serious stuff that's gone on. And if you don't think so, build yourself a time machine and ask you if this progresses 20 years, what it's going to be like for your great grandchild.
Just talk to us old farts. We'll tell you what it was like.
Yeah.
I grew up under the Warren Court. I grew up where women's rights were recognized. I grew up where we were told we had a right to still be secure in our homes and our papers from search and seizure.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike the Supreme Court we have today that has said warrantless searches of people's houses are now okay. That our people in our papers, guess what? That should include my email. It doesn't seem to. That should include my voicemail. It doesn't anymore. What's the difference between an email and today and a letter of 250 years ago? That's what they were protecting then. That's what they're protecting now, except for the government doesn't believe it needs protecting because the government only protects the people with badges, people with money, and people with Bibles.
And if you didn't do anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about.
Okay, so get those stories in. If you're not a writer or your story just doesn't make the cut, please buy the anthology when it comes out.
And tell everybody about it.
And tell everybody about it, because that's the kind of information we need to get out there.
Yeah, because
I want to thank the audience for showing up. They had some really great comments.
Yes.
So
yeah, and it's been fun, guys, and thank you much. Bye-bye.
Bye.